Welcome back. Today we're going to look at strategy maps, the balanced scorecard, and even just supplier scorecards in general, and look at the role that they play within a quality organization. Now, one of the big challenges that you organizationally have in the translation of strategy and plans and all of those other things that you created is how do you actually coordinate the behavioral change that's supposed to go with them so that your employees are actually doing the things that you want them to do to actually take you towards the directions you're looking for? And then kind of how do you know what progress you're making and the various different elements of that? And that's really where the concept of the balanced scorecard comes in. So balanced scorecards developed in the 1990s by Bob Kaplan and David Norton. And it becomes a way to build on a traditional scorecarding concept, but broaden it. So traditional supplier scorecard, and we'll look at them in a little bit of detail a little bit later, is a tool that was used ever since you started to see strategic sourcing come online. And it's a series of measures that you figure out that are through the customer eyes of basically what's important to them. So it's usually at least some financial or cost related things, some things related to delivery, some things related to certain quality dimensions. And you, on a monthly or quarterly basis, you kind of have this card that documents kind of what the actual result was for the period. Usually you have previous period, and very often they're color coded so that, like, if you're meeting goals and everything's good, it's green. If things are a little challenged, it might be yellow. If you have a problem with that particular measure for that period, it would be red. And the concept lets you, between yourself, the supplier, and the customer, kind of focus on conversations about the metrics that are important to them and kind of what you're doing and where you are. And it kind of feeds into this continuous, improvement, always trying to get better at what you do. So the balanced scorecard concept builds from that. It's a different tool. It is a measurement, but it's more of a management system. Because what it does is it looks at four different perspectives of the organization, and it's made up of both objectives and measurements as well. And it really is, it plays the role of a strategy map as well. So what you do is you, excuse me, you have four different perspectives for it, right? So you have a financial perspective, which is kind of in the rear view mirror, like the previous quarter, usually. And then you have a customer perspective, which is a little more current and has to do with kind of how your customers see you. Then you have an internal perspective, which has to do with the things that you're doing within your organization now, which will affect how you'll resonate with your customers, and how you resonate with your customers will affect your financial performance. And then you also have a learning and growth perspective, which is about the longer term investment kinds of things that you do that change what you can do internally, which changes how you can do with your customers, which then changes what you do in your financial perspective. So they actually feed into each other, and there's a particular order that it follows. So one of the things that it gets out of, which happens sometimes with traditional scorecarding, is it gets out of the short-term financially oriented viewpoint, which is very common, and it broadens the view, right? So if you watch and I hope you watched the little example of the balanced scorecard, I'm pretty sure that example is probably Intel that they came up with. And it looks at how, basically Intel's strategy for how they were going to grow themselves, in the semiconductor business. There isn't really a lot of opportunity for product augmentation, right? You're not writing new code to fix things that are in market. Your product is one that your customers integrate into various different circuits to make various different products. So really very much what you're about is new product introduction. So you're developing new chipsets or variations of of existing families, right, for various different usages. And that's common. So often what happens is the topography that they create that gets used in computers will often be scaled down to a smaller and more power-friendly variation down the road that gets used in the mobile products as well, so that they get to kind of reuse and augment some of the technologies they've developed. But they knew their business wasn't about, kind of fixing things that are in market. It's very much about new product introduction. There's a particular cycle to it, and the kind of measures and the objectives that they look at really reflect the reality of their business. And that's another thing that you find about Scorecard, is that when it's created, it's a very specific reflection of you. Another key aspect about it is that it's really a tool for internal use. It's really a tool that you use within your organization, and it helps for coordination of any and all of the various different roles, because it's a way of looking at yourself, right? But holistically. A traditional supplier scorecard is a way to look at the customer and supplier relationship itself. And very much from a supplier standpoint anyhow, it's a focus on how am I doing, what do I look like through the eyes of my customer. That's a different tool than the balanced scorecard piece is. So I'd mentioned about traditional supplier scorecard, which is the base where this kind of developed from, which is a way to keep track of key aspects of the customer and supplier relationship. At a minimum, it's cost, quality, and delivery. There's usually other measures that are used in there. The measures that you use are a reflection of the things that are most important to your customers. Back when I was with BlackBerry, we used this scorecarding concept with our customers. And although there were some measures that were common across all carriers, often each carrier scorecard had a slightly different composition because their strategy was often a little bit different from one of those organizations to the other. And there was usually at least one measurement that was on there that was reflective of something that was key to that customer's strategic direction that they were taking. So for example, I mean, common things that were on it had to do with, on-time delivery, had to do with the cost of the product and the expected costs of, because usually over the life of a contract, our piece cost went down to our customers. There was an aspect of that had to do with returns. And there was an aspect often, but not on all the cards, that had to do with their churn of BlackBerry customers. Churn is a wireless term that basically talks about when your customers leave either that product or that particular carrier, and it's a reflection of the turnover of a customer base. Churn was a pretty common element, but it wasn't in all of them, right? It really depended on whether that partner, had a major strategic push on churn at that, in that point in time when you were doing it. So with your supplier scorecards, right, which is about the customer supplier relationship, you identify the performance metrics. So these are specifically measurable, not opinion kinds of things that are most critical to your customer organization. That's why I said they often will reflect the strategy and strategic choices of your customer. And it lets you focus on measuring yourself based on the things that your customers told you are important to them. And then you keep working on obviously trying to improve on the expectations of what's there. And that's kind of part of that whole continuous improvement piece. Excuse me. Internally, it's great because for a supplier particularly, because it gives you that view through your customer's eyes. It's a very easy to share perspective, which is great because often as you get deeper into an organization, some of the roles get farther away from directly touching the customers that you have, so that they miss some of the details that you would normally get. And it also provides a very direct linkage between kind of the things that we do and the results that our customers see. So, if I'm in a production space, I'm just producing things and I'm shipping and I'm trying to, fit in with the metrics and the objectives that have been given to me internally. But to see how that actually resonates with our end customers becomes a really valid way. And I know we used it very successfully to try to positively drive change in our manufacturing sphere to become more responsive to our customers' needs. One of the challenges that we had was that the marketplace could be pretty dynamic, and we had kind of long lead times and not a lot of flexibility in changing production schedules. And one of the things that our scorecarding activities with our customers reinforced with the rest of our organization was kind of the pivotal role that being more flexible played. And it meant that our production folks had to change things that they were doing to try to make us more flexible. You'll find that in the scorecard itself, you document acceptable, unacceptable. Sometimes you'll actually have defined ranges of performance, and there's certain things that happen at different ranges. All of your measures should balance from each other, right? So they're not all cost related, they're not all delivery related. They have to be objective, as I mentioned before. They're not opinion related, so they need to be things that are measurable in a consistent way. The source of the information needs to be credible, and they have to reflect a period of time that makes sense. It's usually what you're looking at is either a monthly or a quarterly basis. It kind of depends on the cadence of the business and how quickly you can make changes to things that happen. Excuse me. When you're designing this tool, right, you figure out through your customer's eyes key performance measures. You kind of figure out, well, how do we measure those things? What are good ways to measure, right? So how do I measure delivery in this particular circumstance? Is it a binary thing, like that you're on time or you're not on time? And in some cases it is, right? And if you have a very busy distribution center, it's very common that that you have to make bookings, and they'll have specific delivery windows that you have to hit. And if you don't hit that window, basically you have to reschedule. So in that case, like a binary, were you on time or you're not, is kind of like all that matters. In other cases, it could be, a sliding scale, as long as it's within 10 minutes of the time, whatever. And again, it's going to be situationally driven. And you got to figure out those measures, and then you collectively figure out how do you do them, what's the review period, who needs to be involved in it, and then you figure out a structure that you just keep doing. In fact, we used to book ours a year at a time, because we knew, it was the first Tuesday of every month or whatever that we did it with this particular partner. So, we would book the sessions ahead of time, makes it really easy to fit into people's calendars. You have to train the folks around the process of what you're doing. What does it mean? How do we how do we complete the cycles? Who are we working with on the other side? Kind of all of those pieces. I'd mentioned before minimum element. This is a good test question. Minimum elements with scorecard: quality, delivery, and cost. Excuse me. Here's an example of one of them that has a few different parts of the layout. So up top, you see that they've got the yield, they've got delivery, and they've kind of got an overall report card sort of grade. And there's a legend here about and gives you some actual scores. And then up top, depending on the range that you're in, there's various different activities that are triggered, right? So in this case, anything above 90% is an acceptable yield. Below, you would start to get into a space where they would likely audit. So they would get involved, the customer would get more involved with you, figure out what you're doing and where it's going. And it's not from a punitive standpoint, it's from a trying to resolve issues. Because again, when you're in a strategic sourcing relationship, this isn't about blame, right? This isn't the traditional coat of arms sort of thing. This is about resolving the issues, understanding the basis for them, and trying to remove the root cause so they don't reappear. This one also has a historical tracking below. And you'll find that most scorecards have some historical perspective to it. I know the one that we use didn't track, only track the previous period, because really we were only interested in kind of where we were now and where were we last time, because you were often working on a specific measure based on a result of a previous period. So there were things that you did that were kind of documented in the process. And when you're looking at the current results, you're kind of looking at, did we get the effect that we were hoping to get? If we didn't, why was it falling short? And then that would drive a lot of the review conversation that you would have for that particular cycle. Now, switching over to the balanced scorecard as a concept, right? And it is a strategy mapping exercise. So it's a way of taking the company's strategy and mapping it to specific objectives with specific measures that you have in place, right? So back to the video example that's there about, percentage of new products, of new product introduction, introduced in, as I said, it shows you multiple perspectives because it's both financial, customer, internal, and learning and growth. They all balance off of each other. It lets you translate your strategy into measurable actions. And there is a cause and effect framework to it, right? The stuff that we do in learning and growth affects what we can do internally. What we do internally affects with customers, and how we run with customers affects what happens financially. And that cascading and those pieces can have an effect on various different parts of the organization. So it's a tool that can be used holistically within the organization. And in fact, in the little clip that Bob Norton is talking about strategy maps and balanced scorecard, basically, is how it can be used in an organization to support that behavioral change, right? And the examples of, I'm not sure that I would love to have a CEO like looking over my shoulder, but the idea of, do you know what this is? Can you explain it to me? If your employees can explain the strategy of the company, that's a good thing. If they can't, that's not a good thing, right? So understanding what the strategy is drives alignment. And that's one of the big things that you want, is you want all the various different roles aligning to each other in the direction that you want. And then them understanding what they're doing day to day in their job and how that relates to one or more of the characteristics that you see on your scorecard or in your strategy map is crucial. And that's really the best way of using that kind of a tool. It's interesting because historically, a lot of planning tools were created, and they were kept at very senior levels in the organization. And it largely, I think, came from a space where you were afraid of your competitors getting access to this. One of the challenges that you would have in any organization is as you start to communicate something more widely, the likelihood that information ends up externally gets very high. But the truth is, if your competitors are any good, they're figuring out what your strategy is anyhow, based on the things that you're doing in market, based on your financial results and the things that are in those documents, if they're a publicly traded company, in the whole competitive analysis space that we talked about right in the basic planning pieces. You're already kind of figuring that stuff out. So it's not really a secret in most cases. And if it's a secret from your employees, you'll have a great deal of difficulty actually achieving it, right? So a broader sharing and dissemination of this information really, really does help. And whether you use a strategy map itself or whether you use a balanced scorecard variation, it gives you a graphical way to show what is it we're trying to do, how do we measure the success for that, and then how do you as an individual employee fit into this overall scheme. So here's a slide that gives us a good view of the multiple perspectives of the balanced scorecard that we talked about before. And keep in mind, there's a time period to each, right? So your financial one is kind of past period. Customer tends to be more current. Internal is a little bit leading, and learning and growth is a fair bit leading. So there are all, time perspectives in each of these, and they all reflect overall the strategy of the company, because your financial objectives and measures will reflect your strategy. The things that you're doing internally will reflect your strategy. The success that you have with customers will be a reflection of it. And then your learning and growth, which is a very, very important part of it, is all about, making creating the environment that will allow you to do the things to continue to win over time, right? And if you think back to the there's a little video on what is strategy that we did at the beginning of the strategy cycles, right? And it's like, where do I compete? You know, what makes me different from other competitive choices, and why do customers continue to choose me? And one of the key things that they talk about is what's my ability to sustain that position over time. And that has to do with the kinds of investments and the kinds of things that you do in this area, because there is no business that is static, right? So there's always development, there's always growth, there's always, you know, suppliers around you and other competitors making changes. So for you to continue to win in the marketplace over time, you need to continue to make investments in this kind of learning and the growth space that reflect your overall strategy, because that will actually, those will pay off in the changes in what you can actually do, and that will pay off in the changes that your customers actually realize from your products and services. One of the interesting things about the measures that you're picking, and this is true either for a balanced scorecard viewpoint or even for a supplier scorecard standpoint, is you want a mix of measures that not only balance different areas, but you also, if you can do it, you want measures that give you indications of different things. And what do I mean by that is things like, excuse me, something that would indicate productivity improvements, right? Which is like an efficiency measure, which really goes to the kind of continuous improvement piece. So is there something that we're measuring that's part of this cycle that's indicative of us getting better on that aspect? Leading or lagging indicators, really, really good, because they give you an indication of either a change that's about to take place or their confirmation of a change that's taken place. One of the challenges in managing in real time is understanding whether, when you see a change in a measurement, is it an anomaly or is it an actual, you know, change that's actually more permanent in nature. And is there a way to get early warning of something that's changing? So I'd mentioned before, when I had my cell phone repair business, I gathered a bunch of critical success factor information that I used as part of the management of the health of the business. And my door traffic, for example, was both a leading and a lagging indicator. So the pattern that I saw is, before we were about to get busier and do more business, so in other words, have our revenue go up, I would see more traffic. And I would also incidentally see more traffic on the phone and from email requests and things like that. And it makes sense, because people would like, they'd come in and they go, hey, how much to fix this? And they go, okay. And then they go away and, you know, wait till they got paid or think about it or whatever it was. Before we saw an upsurge in business, we'd see an increase in traffic, both physical traffic, telephone, and email requests. And it usually led the change, particularly if it was a single day, it could have been an anomaly. But if we had 2 or 3 days in a row where, like, we saw an increase in that volume over expectations, same time previous year, that, you know, right month that you're in, that kind of stuff, it usually was an indication that the business was about to go up. And it usually lasted for some period of time. Like, we're talking, you know, week or two anyhow from a change. Change in traffic was also a lagging indicator too for me. It actually would play both roles, because the business model was somebody come in, they drop something off, they'd go away, we'd fix it, we'd call them, they'd come pick it up. So at any point in time, I had stuff fixed, just waiting for people to come and pick up. And when I saw the traffic go down after a sustained amount, it usually gave me an indication of that we were kind of coming down to the end of a particular pattern, right? So that we knew, hey, we're about to get busier, and then we also knew, hey, we're about to see a slowdown that happened. So some of the different measures, you know, can give you different insights if they're available, and and if you can find them, um, to help manage it in a meaningful way, the business that you're in. So I'd mentioned before this translation, right, from strategy to action, right? So in your strategy map, right, you would have something like, the how the company creates value for its customers. Your objective would be, what are the key goals or that objective? You'd have a measurement of it, or an actual metric, and usually part of the metric is kind of like what you're trying to do. So what's the target of where you're trying to go, right? What we need to achieve. And then it actually drives the specific things that people are going to do, and who are they going to do, who's going to do them, and what's required, and all of these various other pieces to make sure that kind of everything lines up. I mentioned this cause and effect, for the balanced scorecard. The order, as they point out in the video, the order makes a difference, right? Because one feeds into the other, and not only that, they're all indicative of kind of a different place in time.